All right, welcome everyone to the Roundhill WPAY weekly update. If you are into ETFs that hold a basket of underlying holdings and pay a weekly distribution, if your primary objective is generating income through ETFs, then this is the video for you. I think you're going to get a lot of good information out of it because we talk about the underlying holdings of WPAY, how they've performed, and what's driving them to go up or down. And so let's dive right into it. This was an interesting week for WPAY because I'm going to highlight all the earnings that came out this week. I'm going to highlight it in kind of a light blue right here, and then in yellow you'll see the earnings that are coming out next week. So all told, we had earnings from the really major tech companies like Google, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and then the crypto ones, Coinbase and Strategy. So if you want to get a sense of how they all did, I've pulled up the charts as well. We'll start with Google. As you can see from the 5-day chart, they beat earnings and they had some very positive news. Google was trading around 266, 270, and then after earnings on Wednesday, it went up to 292, cooled off, and ended the week at 281. Amazon, you can just see from the chart, they really outperformed with their earnings call, trading around 227, 226, and then after earnings go all the way up to 253, cools down at 244. So good to see there. Meta was a different story. Again, you can tell where their earnings call was. Started the week around 750, closed almost down another $100, or actually down $100 to 648, 650. So Meta didn't do so well in their earnings. Microsoft, more muted, such a big company. You can see they started around 530, closed around 517. This was around when they had their earnings call, so dropped a little bit there, but not a terrible week for them. Apple, again, you can see where their earnings call was, a dip. It looks like at the end of the market, maybe some after-hours selling, and then rising up to 282, cooling off at 270. Coinbase, not a great week, down 531, maybe less impacted by earnings and more just the price of Bitcoin. Let's actually check that. Bitcoin price, 5 days. So yeah, down 3.77% there. And this will help us when we look at Strategy, down 10%. Started the week at almost 300, closed at 270, just about down 10% exactly. And you saw the Bitcoin chart tracking there. So those were the big earnings from 7 of the underlines on WPAY. Now remember that Roundhill will actually own Google stock, GOOW. The fund is about a total return swap and then 20% Google. So they do own the underlying tickers as well, but they're mostly comprised of a total return swap. So I guess looking forward to next week because we've got Palantir, AMW, Robinhood, and Berkshire Hathaway coming out, and then a couple weeks later we'll complete it out with NVIDIA on the 19th of November. So let's take a look at the stocks. We'll get the average return of the underlying holdings. So the average stock return was 1.96%, so that's good to see. We'll look at the biggest winner was Amazon, followed by NVIDIA, and then Palantir, and then Google, all up 8% each. We'll look at how many winners they had. So out of, I think they're holding, how many positions? Still 15. I haven't seen them add those other positions. So out of 15, they had 10 winners, which means 5 losers on there. And now we'll look at how Roundhill underlines did. So the average price return of the Roundhill stocks, or the Roundhill ETFs, excuse me, was 1.18%. And now we'll look at the average total return because we've got the distributions here. So the average total return should be higher, or will be higher, at 2.24%. So they outperformed their stock return with the total return of about 114%. So not quite the 1.2 multiplier or the 120% that they target, but that was close. And the average distribution yield, let's see what that was. 1%, so that's consistent with what we've been seeing week over week. Let's sort this and see who had the highest. Looks like Robinhood, then Coinbase, then AMD. So that's also consistent with what we've seen. And then Berkshire's usually at the bottom because it's the least volatile of these companies, but looks like Netflix was also kind of towards the bottom there. Okay, so winners, let's do a count if to see how many of these were positive, and we're going to look at total return only. So we're going to just look at how many had a total return win, 10. So that means 5 that were negative on the week. And lastly, we'll see out of the 15 holdings that they hold, who did better. So it looks like the stock had 7 victories over Roundhill, but Roundhill had 8, which I believe is what we saw last week. So Roundhill on a total return basis beat the underlying stocks 8 times out of the 15, which is good to see. If you hold Roundhill, it did it for pretty much all of the ones that had, super performance. And then for the ones where Roundhill didn't beat the underlying stock, you can kind of see what happened there. We'll take Meta as an example. So Meta, the stock, was down 12%. Roundhill, their return was amplified because they have that total return swap exposure, so down 15.26%, cushioned by a 0.91% dividend, so only down 14.35% there. So that kind of explains, what's going on there. And now we'll just look at WPAY by itself. So the distribution was 63 cents, I think 62.50. The start of the week price, which is the price as of the end of last week's close, was 52.86. End of week price 53.86, so it closed up $1 higher. The yield was 1.18%, the price return 1.89%, and the total return was 3%. But remember, if you look at the Roundhill 5-day chart just on Google, you're going to see that they have a different story, and that's because Roundhill weekly payers measure their price or their total return from the previous Friday's close to the current Friday's close. So it's kind of like a Friday to Friday rather than a Monday to Monday. That's in their prospectus. You can read it to get familiar with that. And overall, what we can see is that when, let's take a look at just the NASDAQ. When the NASDAQ has a pretty good week, Roundhill has a slightly better week. When the underlines have a decent week and most of them are up, Roundhill's tending to have a much better week because of that extra distribution, but also because they're not dragged down as much by the underperformance. Meta really underperformed at down 12%, and therefore the Roundhill METW was down 14.35%. And so if we divide that, we see 14.35 divided by 12. So Roundhill had amplified exposure of about 118% to the return of Meta. And if you get a lot of those in 1 week, it really is going to drag down the portfolio, and you're going to see Roundhill underperformance. But all these overperformance or outperformance here definitely helped and brought it up. So I think this was a very successful week for Roundhill, not only just in how they performed, but also if we look at the WPAY assets under management, they're closing in on 500 million. I should really start tracking this because when I first did this video, I think they were at 120 million. So I think it's very possible that they close close to $1 billion by the end of the year. And look at when they started, September 4th. So just in inflows, they could probably hit $1 billion. But even with inflows of people buying the ETF and the appreciation of the stocks, if they continue to go up, this could tip the fund close to $1 billion. And remember, they've also waived their management fee until September 30th, 2026. So that's probably attracting a lot of people, especially some of you who have kind of sold Ulti and gone into WPAY. I think that's an attractive offer from them, but I'm not recommending it. I personally don't hold WPAY just yet. I'm still trying to understand how it's going to do in down markets. But looking at the underlying holdings, understanding that this is basically like the S&P 500 or NASDAQ that's paying out a quality dividend, I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing, but just want to tread cautiously. So thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you in another one.